We've talked about how to prepare a poster. As we mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, a poster presentation has two pieces. It has the poster and it has the presenter, you. So now we're going to talk about a presentation. We're going to start with what are the goals of the presentation, and this will look very familiar if you've been with me from the beginning. Goal 1, to capture interest. You want people to be interested in your research. You want to communicate about your project. You want people you talk to know more than they did when they arrived. You want to inspire a desire to know more. As a presenter next to a poster, that's going to show itself most by people asking questions. As you're preparing to present with your poster, you're going to want to think about doing two different types of presentations. The first presentation is somebody walking up and saying, "Hey, what's this about?" Just as a note, if your poster is being judged, most of the judging is going to be based on this. So what we are asking people to do is put together a short presentation that expands on your poster, builds on it, and further explains your research in about 90 seconds or less. If you're familiar with the term, this is the classic elevator pitch. Somebody gets on an elevator with you and your poster, and by the time you get to your floor, you've said everything that there is to be said. Talk a little bit more about what's in there as we go on. But the one thing that you are probably going to be doing most often at the poster session is this. Tell me what your research. What's this about? What have you done? In some form, you are going to be invited to build upon what's on your poster. This is the one you can prepare. This is the one you can practice. This is the one you can be ready for, knowing it's coming. The other type of presentation, okay, thanks, but I'm really interested in this. Can you tell me more about? And because you don't know exactly what questions are coming, this is the part you can't practice. But there's some things to think about. First of all, you've been working on this project for a long time. You know it pretty well. You can talk about it. But in understanding what questions are going to be asked, there's something you can do. When you're designing your poster, show it to everybody you know. Whether they understand your field or don't. Have them look at your poster. Give them your 90-second spiel. Have them tell them to ask you the things they don't understand at that point. As you do this process with enough people, you'll start to see a lot of questions showing up more than once. What are those questions? Think, okay, what's a good answer for that one? The more you can prepare for the questions you expect, the more bandwidth you'll have when you get the really weird one coming out of left field. But these are the two different things you'll need to be doing while you're standing with your poster. Talk about your research in general, and then answer specific questions that come up. So, first of all, know your material. As I mentioned, you've been working on your research for a long time. You know what the research is about. But in terms of that, tell me about your research pitch. The first thing I recommend is, as you are preparing your 90-second pitch, do not write it out word for word and memorize it perfectly, because it's a recipe for failure. The problem with memorizing any sort of presentation, and if I were coaching you on an oral presentation, I'd say exactly the same thing. The problem with memorizing a text is, as you're going along perfectly, everything's working. It's like you're on a train track. Everything's going exactly the right way, and then you derail. All of a sudden, you forget the word. And if you are working on a precisely memorized script, when you get off track, there will only be exactly one word in the English language that is the next word that will get you back on track. Rather, the more you practice through this, the more you do it, the more you'll realize it's starting to sound exactly the same every time. But maybe a word here and there is different. Then if you get off, you can say, okay, what am I talking? Oh yeah, I got this. So don't write yourself a script and expect to follow it perfectly. Write yourself some bullet points, write yourself an outline, follow that, talk about it. Other things, as I said, practice. Practice your 90-second pitch. Practice answering the questions that come up. The more you practice, the cleaner it's going to get. After you've practiced it, think about it. What did you do well? What didn't you like? If you can, and if you're willing to do so, record yourself doing it. It's a tremendous tool that most people hate using, myself included. But if you can watch yourself, you'll learn some things. But every time you do it, think about it. What went well? What do you want to improve? And then do it again. The more you practice it, the more comfortable you're going to get with it. The more you'll notice, okay, I really like the way that one went. I didn't like that part as much. What did I do before? The more you do it, the more options you have with it. So spend time working on it. Absolutely, for the 90-second or so pitch, time yourself. If you are unfamiliar with, new to, or uncomfortable with public speaking, you will have no idea how long you've been talking. It will either feel like 5 seconds or 8 hours, and very little in between. So time yourself, get a sense. We are not asking our judges to time these at 90 seconds, but we want it to feel concise. Make sure you're somewhere in that general range. And if you're too short, add stuff. If you're too long, pull stuff out. But definitely have a good sense of how long you're talking. And then just some very basic tips. When you're talking, be heard. As I mentioned earlier, we have never done the poster session at the Brent Center. The Brent Center is a giant space with a lot of overhead space for sound to start rolling around. I expect cacophony. It's going to be loud, and it's probably just going to be a lot of background noise as well. So if you are talking to somebody, use your outside voice. You want to be heard. Back when we did the poster session in the Student Center, we did a practice your presentation session. Most people would come in for oral presentations. Every now and then somebody would come in for a poster, and what we'd have them do is we'd divide the number of people in the room. Half the people would go over and ask them questions about the poster, and the other half of the people would go close by and talk as loudly as they possibly could, so they knew they could be heard. Plan to work to be heard. Do not yell, because that's really bad for your throat, and you'll last about 20 minutes, and you got an hour and a half to do this. But plan to speak audibly. If you are naturally a soft-speaking person, start practicing now. But you want to be heard. You want people to understand what you're talking about. Find a comfortable pace to talk for you. A lot of people will say that a big problem with any sort of oral presentation is people talk too quickly. And I disagree with that as a known problem. Because some people just naturally talk quickly. And if you are one of those people who naturally talks at a very rapid pace, and you can be understood as you're talking at a rapid pace, and people understand everything you're saying, and that's what makes you most comfortable, do it. I would much rather have you speaking quickly and audibly and comfortably than have you sound like you're forcing yourself to slow down. Speak at a pace that's comfortable for you. However, if the pace that's comfortable for you is fairly rapid, consider this. The faster you talk, the faster you're going to get ahead of your audience. So the more quickly you talk, the more you're going to want to stop and let them catch up. Another thing to think about as you're working on any sort of public speaking, avoid the filler words. Any guess the most common word that will be spoken at our symposium? Do you know a definition of the word means, I don't know what to say next. So, a couple of ways to avoid this. First of all, know what you're going to say. Be comfortable with it. Practice it as often as you can. Another way to avoid saying just stop talking. Let silence fill it. Something else. Oh, if you are somebody who says a lot in your normal speech, and many of us do, there is a way to start getting over that, and it's painful. Because most people who or like or a lot aren't always aware they're doing it. So if you think this is something I want to get over doing, the way to do it is tell every one of the people with whom you interact that you're trying to get past this, so you want to know when you're doing it, and have them call you out every time you do. You will hate them shortly. But as you start noticing yourself doing it, you'll start noticing doing it. And then you can say, was that really a good time for that? It's a potentially agonizing period of self-reflection, but you will come out of it with much less filler text in there and much more direct language as you're going on. The other thing, or another thing to think about as you're speaking, I mentioned it earlier, pause. If you're speaking quickly, stop. Let the audience catch up. If you don't know what to say, stop. Gather your thoughts. But also, even in a 90-second speech, think about what that same 90 seconds would look like on the printed page. There might be 3 different headings. There are periods, commas, punctuation, some things in all caps. You don't have that luxury when you're talking. Put it into your language. If you're coming up to a very important point, say, but you know the most important thing I did. If you stop right then, people will know something important is coming. They'll wait. When you finish a thought, I've heard so many people say, finish up a thought, I'm finishing up a thought, now I'm going to start the next chapter. And as a listener, I think, wait a minute, what just happened? I'm finishing up my thought. Now I'll move on. Okay, punctuation. A pause is probably the single most effective tool in any sort of public speaking. It can be used for so many things, and it makes you sound so polished. The problem with a pause is most people are not used to doing it, particularly in front of other people. When you're standing in front of other people, the natural reflex is to think, they're judging me, I need to keep talking because if I stop, something horrible will happen. So start practicing pausing in your normal speech. As you're talking to friends, just occasionally stop for 3 seconds. 3 seconds is not a lot of time, even though it will feel like an eternity if you're not used to it. But with all of those 3-second pauses I just did any of those sound artificial, forced, anything? It sounds very natural. Practice the pause. It's a good thing. As I've mentioned, the poster presentation is 2 parts. It's the poster and you. And I'm sure most of you have seen people do PowerPoint slides. You're used to all of the pitfalls of watching a badly presented PowerPoint presentation. Same things can happen with a poster. So think about one of the items on our judging sheet is synergy between presenter and poster. How well do you work together? So this is another thing to plan for. When you're talking to somebody, you're going to be very close to them. They're going to be a couple feet away from you. Make eye contact with them. Talk to them. Do not spend the time looking at your poster. So as you can clearly see on the poster, this is the most incredible thing, and oh, are you still there? Don't look at your poster the whole time, except as you're talking about your poster, maybe you want to illustrate something. So if I'm talking about something and I want to say, okay, and then the most important result we got, you see this red arrow here? This is what really illustrates the point. So bring it into the conversation. Don't ignore it completely. But definitely you want to spend most of your focus on your audience. Use the poster as an illustration because by the time they're talking to you, they've already read most of it. And your job is to provide something that isn't on the poster, or to give some sort of summary, some sort of coherent overview of what's on the poster. You've all seen people read exactly what's on the PowerPoint. Do not be that person with your poster. Your time and their time is too valuable. So refer to it, but stay with them. You'll communicate much better that way. And then just some things in terms of, I really don't like that I put attitude at the top of this, but be excited. By the time we get to the symposium, you've spent a lot of time on your research. Hopefully you are excited about the opportunity to talk about this. Let us see that. In all of my years working at UROP, the thing I love the most is watching all of you, who probably you or others showed up in my office some years ago and said, "Hi, I want to do research. How do I do it?" To watch you become successful. Talk about what you've done. Be excited by it. Be excited by your futures that this is leading to. Don't forget that part. This is the one that's always hard. When you are talking in front of other people, whether it's a conversation or in front of a room, people always say, "And act natural." Yeah, this is an unnatural act. But the more comfortable you can be, the more cleanly you'll communicate with your audience. So just a couple of notes. Poster sessions, an hour and a half, either morning or afternoon. I recommend do things like, unless you are severely addicted, avoid caffeine, because then you don't have the crash halfway through. Take a walk beforehand. Whatever you can do to relax your body. If you're into meditation, do a little bit. Do a little yoga. But whatever you can do to relax before you get to the presentation, the less stressful it'll be when you're actually doing it. Breathe. It's one of the things that when people are talking to an audience, they often forget to do. It is probably going to be quite warm in the Bren Center, which means it's even more important to keep breathing because it probably won't be great air at that point. So if you find yourself rushing through sentences and getting to a point where you just keep talking and all of a sudden you start running out of air and it gets really slow, just stop. Breathe. Air is important, both in the vocal mechanism and also keeping you alive. So breathing is one of the first things we forget when we're nervous, so keep doing it. Confidence, we've talked about this. The more you can convey, you know this stuff. You've done this. You are now an expert in your field. Share that with us. And comes up with one more point. Somebody asks you a question, you don't know the answer. What do? Be honest. Yes. Admit it. And offer to find out. Get their contact information. If you happen to see your faculty mentor walking by, hey, professor, can I borrow you for a minute? Say, oh, great question. I don't know. Can I get back to you with an answer? They will love you for that. They'll be impressed, and you'll get the opportunity to learn something new. So be humble. You're experts in what you've done. You are not the world expert in your field yet. I'll give you 5 years. So if you don't know, admit to it. And then just some reminders before we close. The purpose of this presentation is to communicate. You've done some really cool stuff. I want to walk away feeling that coolness and knowing something about what you've done, even if I don't know anything about your field. The presentation, you and the poster makes up the whole thing. And then above all, have fun. Even though we have judging available at the poster session, this is intended to be a low-pressure event. One of the major purposes of the symposium is to give you all the opportunity to present at a professional level academic conference without high stakes. Your grad school application, your job, your funding does not depend on this. Enjoy it. Have a blast. And then when it does have those high stakes, you'll think, I actually had fun doing this. It'll be easier. There's a QR code on the screen. We'll also send you the same link as a follow-up to this workshop. The reason we do these presentations is we want to help you learn stuff about our programs and what we're doing. The only way we know if we're doing it effectively is if you tell us. So if there are things you think that were A, spectacular, or B, could be improved, let us know. Because, like I say, we want to do as well as we can. The more we learn from you, the better we can do that. And at that point, what we're going to do now is, if there are any questions, I'll take them. And then what we're going to do, I have half a dozen posters here. I'm going to give you all a few minutes, take a look at them, and then we'll just gather as a group and chat. What do we like? What don't we like? What would you do in these instances? It will be very unguided, very random. If you have to leave, by all means do, but that's going to be the last part of this. So any questions at this point? Yeah. PowerPoint is probably the most often used, but really whatever's comfortable for you. So, yeah.
I was going to ask, do you have any tips for like standard font sizes for them? Because I don't actually know what font size they're using.
Yes, I do, and I can't remember what they are. Unfortunately, I think they're in our poster design guidelines, which you can get from our website. And if they're not, email me and I will have found out.
Got it, thank you.
Other questions? That's the one thing I always forget to memorize before I come into these presentations. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is this on like the guidelines to like contact the UROP office? Do we like email you guys, or do we like go in person?
So if you are just printing your poster and not having it professionally mounted, we will have a spot in the Bren Center on the day of the symposium with poster boards and ways to mount them. So you don't need to let us know. We'll have a stack. My recommendation would be come early. It could happen that we run out, but probably not. Yep. Anything else? Yeah.
Are there any particular qualities in posters that differentiate between the ones that are fairly standard and the ones that really excel, or the ones that really stand out?
Yes. You want more answer than that, don't you? The biggest thing for me in the ones that really stand out are the ones that both keep in mind the goals of the poster, to communicate, to inspire people to ask more, but also the ones that are willing to take risks. If you will go to a lot of poster sessions, say a biosci session, you're going to look at a whole bunch of them. The titles will be different, the pictures will be a little different, and they'll be identical. If I'm walking down this row of posters, why am I looking at yours? And that's why things like headings that have real information in them, particularly big text, illustrations that mean something, but also are, to a degree, eye-catching, but also there's enough information in the illustration that I can just glance and, oh, that's kind of interesting. So it's very much the first level of effectiveness is, why do I stop and look at it? The second level of differentiation is, how well do you present the information once I've stopped and started paying more attention to it? And that's where things like brevity, only putting the information that's critical. There is, I can't remember the exact link, but in our poster design guidelines, there are a couple of links to places that work with posters. One of them is a blog that's been going on for years now, that the guy, all he talks about is poster design. And one of the things I love is he's been doing this long enough that people just send him a poster and say, what do you think? And yes, you may do this online. And he'll make comments on them. He will maybe redesign it. But you learn a lot just by looking at other posters. And just ask yourself, what works, what doesn't? So it's hard to give a perfect answer to that because it's so subjective. But the biggest thing is just be different successfully, which comes back to the no distractions part.